This video is brought to you by Patreon provider Lars.
Oh, joy of joys. Not only did I get a new Patreon, but I got a Patreon that offered to send me his brand new Athlon LPVO. How new? So new he hasn't even gotten his hands on it yet. And I'm very excited for this and for Lars joining the crew. So, first off, Lars, thank you very, very much. Now, if you couldn't tell what we already have, I can't really help you. But in case you don't know, this is an Athlon Helos BTR 1 to 4.5 by 24. Now, he did buy this for shooting competitions, and he asked for me to check it out and let him know what I thought. Reticle is a little hard to see, but there it is. And I'm curious to see how this is going to look in person. The box is typical Athlon. Fantastic. Comes very, very close to what I feel SIGs are. And SIGs are probably the best box on the market. Full stop. These are really, really close. Now, what does this LPVO come in at? It's roughly $350, which I'm not going to consider to be cheap. Cheap is something like this. The Primary Arms Classic 1 to 4, which comes in at just around $100 and is actually great for the money, because if you're curious about getting into an LPVO, you don't have to spend a fortune to see if you're going to like the 1 to 4 magnification, or rather that a 1x that's actually pretty good. This thing is surprisingly good for its money. But that's also a very simple and classic LPVO. This thing has a lot more running for it than just that. Here is the owner's manual. We're not going to go through this too crazy. We have a lens cleaning cloth and an Allen key. Fantastic. And let's see what we got. Right off the bat, if you couldn't already tell, there's something unique about this LPVO that I've never experienced before. And I'm curious to see how well it works, or if it should even be there. We're going to find out together. Anyway, this is a very typical owner's manual, give you a basic rundown of how everything functions, which I don't think we need to stress over too much. Let's get into the meat and potatoes, shall we? So yes, this thing has target turrets. No, that is not the thing I was talking about. First off, I love bikini covers. So what was the one thing I was mentioning that this thing is going to be a little bit weird? This thing has a side focus parallax adjustment. Have you ever seen one of those on an LPVO? I personally have not. And this thing goes from, let's see, all the way, the minimum of 10, oh, come on, focus. This thing goes from 10 yards with a near complete 360 rotation to infinity. But before that, it goes to 800 yards. For a second focal plane, 4.5 LPVO, I don't know how usable this is going to be. Now, this does make sense to me if you're going to be shooting a lot of really, really close targets in rapid succession. But even so, at 1x, even at 10 to 15 yards, I haven't really noticed that much of an issue on some other LPVOs. So I'm very curious to see how well this thing performs. But we'll talk about that in a little bit. Let's start at the back like we usually do. And a fast focus eyepiece is standard on basically every optic, which I would much prefer to see a locking ocular adjustment, just like you've seen on some loopholed options that I've reviewed. Because it's just, you set it and forget it, and it locks in tight, and you never have to worry about this thing getting hit with the brim of your hat, like I've had happen very recently at the range, and it goes, and I'm like, why the hell is the reticle blurry? The brim of my hat was actually pushing this over. Horrible. Anyway, you could already hear that thing moving back and forth. I'm going to go full extension, go in a little bit. Good performance here because there's very little to no wiggle, which I like to see. For $350, there should be absolutely no issues with this thing. Magnification ring, we got 12 o'clock to actually just past 6 o'clock. And with this little nub here, it's not going to be enough to be able to move this from low to maximum magnification or minimum to maximum quickly. So a throw lever will probably be usable or useful in this case. It's got good resistance, but it feels like there's something right there. From around 2 to 2.5x, it actually gets a little tight. I don't know if that'll wear itself in, but it's definitely something that I'm feeling. Let's move onward to the illumination knob. And as you can see, we go from 1 to 11 with no offs in between, it looks like, which is honestly not the end of the world. But for $350, I'd expect to see an off in between. Not only that, I said this in, actually, I said it in a video that I don't think is aired yet, but you don't really need 10, or in this case, 11 brightness settings. 5 or 6 is honestly good enough. But the detents are very sharp. and it glides right into position, and once it's there, it requires a good amount of resistance to turn it, which is fine. Because again, you don't want this thing to accidentally get bumped on when you're putting it away, or bumped off when you need it. Before I forget, let's pull off this battery cover and see what we got. Hard rubber pad on the actual cover itself, and we see these nice strong fingers encapsulating the battery. Very standard design. It works well. Every scope that I've had so far that has this exact same battery mount just works. It's great. You got the 3 dimples on the bottom to make positive contact with the negative terminal on the battery. Yes, I said that correctly. And then you have these fingers, which have usually an O-ring. It looks like there is something on the outside. It looks like it actually might be a little piece of spring. You can see it right there, that are keeping tension on the outside fingers to keep this battery very, very secure. Now on to the elephant in the room, and I'm not calling myself fat, but this parallax adjustment. And you know what? I gotta say, this is very, very smooth. This feels great. Perfect amount of damping, and this is what the magnification ring should feel like. You're listening to Athlon? You should be, because this thing feels a little odd. It's not bad, just odd. This thing is nice and smooth and stops well against the stops, so you don't have to worry about breaking this. It feels nice and tight. Excellent. So before we start talking about the turrets, let's pop them off and see what we got. So with all 3 Allen keys loosened up, you can see this turns without clicking. Let's see if there's still a 0 stop. Yes, there is. Let's pop this off. It looks like our stop is that little pin right there and that pin right there. Internals on this thing are not too impressive. It's just a regular brass shaft, and it's not that large. You can see at least that they clearanced where the set screws go into this groove right here. So at least if when you lock down the set screws, they're going to mar up the inside of this, not the outside, so this way you won't have a difficult time pulling the cap off ever. But nothing too fancy. Nice size O-ring. At least they have plenty of lube on there, so this is nice and easy to manipulate. But again, nothing too crazy. Elevation turret is gigantic, if you couldn't tell. The same with the windage. And as you can see, we have a total of 25 MOA per rotation. Now, this thing does not lock. So it's constantly engaged. So be careful with this thing accidentally adjusting again on you. Hard stop just shy of 24 MOA. And a full on stop at 0. But the clicks feel really good. Again, it sharpens the detent, and once it's there, very little play, and then it takes a good amount of resistance to turn this. So far, elevation sounds good. The windage is so far set up properly for indications from left to right, and let's see how this sounds. So we have a total of 12.5 MOA to the right, and 12.5 MOA to the left. This does go more, but I don't want to run the risk of jamming this into the stop. Again, just like the elevation turret, this thing has excellent detent and feel. And of course, it sounds great. And with that, let's see how this thing looks like.
Alrighty, so what do we have? Well, the first thing you're going to note, or at least that I notice, is just how much of the scope body you see. This is one of the worst performances I've seen of any LPVO since I started doing this channel. It's a lot. Now, I know for some people they might not mind it, they might enjoy it. For me personally, I don't like it because, number one, it takes up a lot of your peripheral vision and it makes the image inside the scope that much smaller. If that went edge to edge, the 1x on this would be a lot bigger and you'd be able to see a lot better as a result. This is clearly a very overcast day, so when I turn the illumination on to full over here and it doesn't really get all that bright, that's as good as it's going to get. You can imagine that on a bright sunny day, you're not going to see this at all. And during the final review, we're going to see just how much that is true. All in all, though, so far, the 1X image quality-wise looks pretty good. But how about when we bring up the magnification to its maximum of 4.5x here at 30 yards? Again, the image looks pretty good. Granted, it's a very overcast day, and thus you're not going to have a lot of the high contrast that you would on a bright sunny day and better colors. So we're going to take this for what it's worth. But ultimately, it looks okay. Now, this is with the parallax set at, I believe, 150 to 200 yards. Let's see if with the side focus we can get this image to look a lot better than what it currently does. After a little bit of fiddling around, you can see it does in fact work. Closer distances is 30 yards with a 4.5x optic, that's minimum. And when we bring it up to about what it should be, which is 30 to 35 yards, it looks really, really good. But I just can't help but question why you'd need it, especially on a scope that has such low magnification. 4.5x is not that much, even when you're shooting inside of 50 yards, let's say. Here at 400 yards at its maximum of 4.5x, again, the image again looks surprisingly good. I try to adjust the parallax a little bit more to see if we get a little bit better sharpness out of it, and ultimately we do. And as a result, everything looks good for what it is. This is an optic that has very interesting quirks and features, not to sound too much like Doug DeMuro. For me, it doesn't really add up, but hopefully during my final review, it'll start to make sense to me. If it makes sense to you, hopefully you'll be interested in watching my full review coming very soon. And that's going to conclude this unboxing. A huge thank you to Patreon provider Lars for sending this in for review, and thank you all very much for watching. See you again next time. And a very huge thank you to all of my Patreon providers. Without you, this wouldn't be possible. If you'd like to help support the channel but don't want to join my Patreon, I completely understand. But you can still help support by using my affiliate links in the description below. Thanks again for watching.